The night was bitter and silent, the kind of cold that freezes the world into stillness. On a lonely country road, a woman's porch light cut through the blizzard like a lighthouse in a sea of white. When she opened her door, a man stood there, rugged, trembling, wrapped in a leather jacket stitched with patches that told stories she didn't want to know. He wasn't supposed to be there, not in her world, not in this storm. Yet something in his eyes, pain, desperation, maybe regret, made her reach out. She didn't yet know that this one act of kindness would shake an entire town. For 20 years, Evelyn Carter had lived quietly on the outskirts of the small Midwestern town of Coldwater. Widowed young, she built a life around service, baking pies for church drives, volunteering at the clinic, tending to her garden even when arthritis bit at her fingers. Folks knew her, but not all respected her. In a place where old prejudices lingered like smoke from a dying fire, Evelyn learned to keep her head down and her door open only to those who knocked with kindness. That December, the snow came early, blanketing the town in a silence that felt heavier than usual. Evelyn didn't mind the solitude. Her house, a modest wooden cabin her late husband had built, stood as a fortress of warmth against the frozen night. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and burning oak. Outside, the wind howled like a hungry animal. Then came the knock, heavy, desperate, unexpected. When she opened the door, she saw a man nearly collapsing from the cold. His beard was frosted white, his leather jacket stiff with ice. Behind him, a motorcycle leaned half-buried in snow, its chrome dulled by the storm. He looked rough, tattoos, scars, a presence that carried both menace and misery. For a moment, Evelyn hesitated. In this town, men like him weren't known for kindness toward women like her. But something in his trembling hands, the way he clutched his chest, broke through the walls fear had built. She helped him inside. That single decision, a small act of mercy, would ripple farther than either of them could imagine. The man said little, his voice gravelly from the cold. Evelyn gave him tea, then a blanket, and listened to the storm rage outside. He sat near the fire, shoulders hunched, the flickering light revealing years of hardship etched into his face. Though he didn't speak much, his eyes wandered the room. To the family photos, the Bible on the table, the framed letter from her late husband's service in Vietnam. When he finally managed a few words, it wasn't gratitude. It was guilt. He mumbled about mistakes, about sons who won't forgive, about roads that lead nowhere. Evelyn didn't press. She'd learned long ago that some wounds needed silence more than sympathy. As the hours passed, she noticed the patches on his jacket. Symbols that made her heart tighten. She remembered them, or what they represented, from news stories, from whispers about violence, from the way her father used to warn her about men who ride with hate. But this man wasn't hatred personified. He was broken, lost, cold, not just from the storm, but from years of carrying things he couldn't set down. When he fell asleep on the couch, Evelyn prayed quietly over him. Not for his sake, but for her own. That she wouldn't let the world's bitterness harden her compassion. By morning, the storm had cleared. The man thanked her, voice barely above a whisper, and left a small metal cross on her table before riding off. 2 days later, Evelyn noticed something strange. A group of motorcycles roared down her usually silent road, half a dozen at first, then more. Their engines thundered against the snow-covered hills. She stood on her porch, heart pounding, as nearly 24 bikers surrounded her house. The leader, a tall man with steel-gray eyes, dismounted and looked at her as though seeing a ghost. He said they'd come for his father. And in that moment, Evelyn realized the man she'd sheltered was not just another traveler. He was the estranged patriarch of a notorious biker brotherhood. A man who had vanished years ago, leaving behind a legacy of anger and division. The leader, the older man's son, stepped forward, his voice cold but uncertain. He'd come expecting hostility, perhaps vengeance. What he found was a woman standing in the snow, unarmed but unafraid, her calm presence defying the intimidating growl of 20 idling engines. He told her they'd found their father's bike abandoned near the road, and a note tucked beneath its seat, A shaky line that read, "The woman in the light saved me." No name. No explanation. Just that. The bikers were hardened men. Some angry, some suspicious. In their world, people didn't help strangers like him. Not his kind, not hers. The silence stretched heavy between them, filled with the ghosts of generations who had taught them to fear one another. Then Evelyn spoke softly, telling them what little she knew, how he had knocked, how she had let him in. Kindness should never depend on skin or symbol. Something shifted. The leader's eyes softened, just enough to betray the conflict inside him. He said his father had walked away from their group years ago after realizing the hate that once bound them together had destroyed everything he loved. He had been searching for forgiveness ever since. The men lowered their heads. Snowflakes melted on leather jackets and tattooed hands. For a brief, impossible moment, the frozen night seemed to hold its breath. They thanked her, not with words, but with silence. Respect. One by one, they removed their gloves, placing them on the porch rail like an offering. Then they turned, engines roaring into the fading twilight, leaving behind only tire tracks and the faint scent of oil and redemption. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn returned to her quiet routines, but something in her heart had changed. The road outside her home, once lonely and feared, became a symbol of something larger. A crossroads between hate and humanity. A few days before Christmas, an envelope appeared in her mailbox. Inside was a photo. The same man she had helped, now sitting beside his son and several other riders, smiling in front of a rebuilt community center in a nearby town. On the back, in shaky handwriting, it read, "Thank you for opening the door. You thawed more than just the cold." Evelyn wept, not out of sadness, but out of awe. Her one act of compassion had sparked a chain reaction she would never fully see. A father and son reunited, a group of men confronting the shadows of their past, and a community learning that redemption often begins in the smallest gestures. That night, she lit a single candle and placed it on her porch, a beacon for any soul lost in the storm. She thought of her husband's favorite verse, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." As snow began to fall again, Evelyn smiled. The world was still cold, cruel in places, but somewhere out there engines roared with new purpose, not as harbingers of fear, but as messengers of change. And so the question lingered, echoing into the night. If a single open door can disarm a lifetime of hate, how many more hearts are waiting to be warmed?